It's been over 250 days since Yuan was first introduced to ZenlessZoneZero, and I have good news. She is still an amazing DPS option, regardless of who you're fighting against. That said, you're here because you're interested in the answers to a few questions. Has Yuan's playstyle changed since 1.1? Should I farm a new set for her? And most importantly, who should I pair with her? Well, you're in luck, as today I'll be answering all these questions and more, but without further ado though, let's break down everything new that you need to know to play Yuan. Yuan's gameplay revolves around dealing high amounts of ether damage to stunned enemies with her unique ammunition system. However, with new pairings like Nicole Astra and the concept of double supports becoming more viable, she also has decent value even when attacking outside of a day's window. As a DPS, Yuan is also unique because she has the ability to use different dash attacks and dodges in her damage combos, and these allow her to reposition or utilize invincibility frames, all while dealing damage. That said, her damage dealing abilities include her EX special attack and ultimate, of which both provide her shotgun shells to then allow her to use her charged basic attack with said shells. On the topic of this attack, this is also how Yuan deals a majority of her damage, and so put simply, Yuan aims to stun an enemy, load up on shotgun shells while doing so, then unload with her ultimate and EX special attacks before the day's window ends. Now, as with all updated guides from my channel, there is a good chance that you're already familiar with this character's kit, so if that's the case, feel free to move to another section. Let's now break down Yuan's core passive and additional ability. Fortunately, Yuan was released before ability descriptions became excessively long, but as a result, her core passive is refreshingly simple. Upon entering the field, she instantly gains 6 shotgun shells for later usage, and additionally, when she performs a charged basic attack using said shells, their damage is then boosted by 20%. What truly makes Yuan a stun-focused DPS, however, is her ability to deal even more damage against stunned enemies, specifically with her charged attack being given an additional 20% extra damage if she lands these hits against a stunned target. Yuan's additional ability is also straightforward, as she simply gains 30 crit rate for 10 seconds after using an EX special, chain attack, or ultimate. But as always, this is assuming she is paired with a support agent or someone from the criminal investigation special response team. Now let's talk about her basic attack. Yuan has 2 basic attack forms, and these are split between her assault mode and her suppressive mode. To make things easy though, assault mode is when she uses her fast kick based moves while also aiming to generate shotgun shells, and by contrast, her suppressive mode is when she uses her charged attacks while consuming the bullets generated to deal a majority of her damage. Now, what's special about Yuan's basics, however, is the fact that they can be optimized and changed depending on additional inputs used. What this means is that holding down a directional key while using either her normal or charged basic attacks will allow her to then reposition while also sometimes changing her attack sequence. Now, despite there being plenty of ways to optimize this, the most notable and impactful of the directional based changes that she can perform comes with Yuan doing dashes left or right while shooting her bullets. The reason this is important is because using this dash attack will allow Yuan to skip parts of her basic attack and effectively reduce the amount of time it takes to get to her higher value basic attack abilities. When performing this shortcut in her assault mode, this means that she gets to the 4th and 5th parts of her basic attack string faster, which will then allow her to generate shells at a quicker pace. In suppressive mode, Yuan can take full advantage of her dash attack skip mechanic to use all 9 stored shotgun shells in a single rapid sequence. When done properly, this allows her to bypass the early charge attacks in certain combos, and this then allows her to use the harder hitting 3rd charge attack with her excess bullets, resulting in higher DPS. Moving along, let's now talk about her special attack. Yuan's EX special attack is the only skill really worth mentioning, and as discussed earlier, this is pretty simple too. When Yuan uses this ability, she fires a series of rounds that deal decent ether damage, but more importantly, she also gains 3 shotgun shells. Now, because of the way that Yuan's kit works, this is equally as important as the damage dealt from this ability, as the shotgun shells will be later used for Yuan's basic attack combo. Something also worth knowing regarding her EX special attack is that it does cost 60 energy to cast, while Yuan can store a maximum of 120 energy. This also means that Yuan can cast a maximum of 2 EX special attacks back to back or within a short period of each other, which is helpful to know if you're trying to plan out your energy and your DPS. Yuan's assist related abilities are pretty standard, but an important detail of her assist follow-up is her ability to generate shotgun shells when performing one. To be more specific, Yuan gains 3 shotgun shells when performing an assist follow-up, while also gaining a shell if she uses a quick assist. This does partly contribute to why double support plus Yuan performs decently, as Yuan still gains additional bullets through assists, even when not having her EX special, chain attack, or ultimate available. Yuan's dodge abilities are similar to her assists as well, where only her dash attack and dodge counter are notable, but like before, this is because her dash attack attack can consume one shotgun shell if held down and its combo is completed, while on the other hand, her dodge counter is notable because it'll also provide Yuan with a shell if she's used it too. Now regarding Yuan's chain attack, this is a skill with a good damage multiplier on it, but like with her other abilities, the 3 shotgun shells that she's given when using it is equally if not more important. To be clear, this can be used alongside a chain attack cancel to generate 6 shells before beginning a damage combo against a stunned enemy, but for transparency's sake, even that is conditional, as sometimes Yuan will overcap on shells before even reaching the dazed state on an enemy. Yuan's ultimate deals a high amount of damage and shares the same 3 shell generating property as her chain attack, but important to know here as well is that using Yuan's EX special before an ultimate is ideal, as the crit rate gained from her additional ability is only active after using an EX special, chain, or ultimate, not during it. For Yuan's skill order, leveling her core, basic, chain/ultimate, and EX special are your highest priorities, but following this, you can then choose to upgrade her dodge and assist abilities, though they don't contribute too much in terms of damage and are otherwise just minor damage increases in the long term. Now let's talk about Yuan's combos. As a disclaimer, this is a character who has plenty of tips and tricks to optimize each fight, but before we get into that, let's start with guidelines and things to remember while playing Yuan. First, making sure Yuan has at least 3 shotgun shells before entering the stun/chain attack phase is essential. Her chain attack instantly grants 3 additional shells, and if you use her special attack as well, this will provide another 3, bringing her total shells to a maximum of 9. This allows her to have the maximum number of shells possible, allowing her to unleash a big burst of charge attacks at the start of her stun window. Next, while it is worth noting that abilities used on an enemy when they aren't dazed don't deal much damage, this doesn't mean that you should overcap on resources to prevent yourself from doing so. This is much more relevant for Yuan plus 2 support teams, as the amount of days present in these lineups are much lower than if Yuan were paired with someone like Qingyi, Ambi, etc. Finally, though it does help to use dash attacks with Yuan's abilities to prevent wasted time, the most important goal for Yuan and most DPSs is to land their ultimates and as many charged basic attack bullets into an enemy before the stun window wears off. So if performing a dash attack or any optimization will lead to you getting hit or mispositioning, consider this a warning to be careful before you lose out on DPS. With this out of the way though, let's now talk about Yuan's combos. The first combo I have for you is for dealing with AoE encounters, and to be honest, this is barely a combo and more like just using a support like Nicole or a stunner to make use of Yuan's chain attack. Fortunately for Yuan, her chain does actually hit pretty hard while also having a decent spread on its hitbox. In most cases though, the ideal approach is as follows. Buff the team, use a support unit to group enemies together, and then apply a stun with the same character. From there, you can swap to Yuan and perform her chain attack, eliminating most enemies just from this alone. However, if they're still alive, performing additional charged basic attacks from this point on will be fine, but in most cases, grouping up enemies with the chain attack from Yuan will be enough to eliminate them. The second combo I have for you is when Yuan needs to deal high single target damage, especially against bosses/elites. For this, the approach is the following. Buff the team with the support, generate/maintain 3 bullets with Yuan on field through her assault mode basic attacks, daze the enemy with a utility character, then enter into Yuan's chain attack when the enemy is stunned. From there, using something like Nicole's chain attack to generate additional ether anomaly against an enemy can be worthwhile, but otherwise using a second chain attack on Yuan using a chain attack cancel, or simply swapping to another support that has a quick assist after using their chain will work as well. Following this though, Yuan should be on field and can then use an EX special for charged basic attacks, another EX special, her ultimate, and then end the rotation with 4 charged basic attacks again in order to use up all of her bullets. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are ways to improve this rotation, and one way to do so is by adding something like the dashes during charge attacks. Once again, this is a pretty significant increase in DPS for any burst window, but for the combo that I just mentioned earlier, the addition of dash attacks would allow your final 3 out of 9 total bullets to be used on the strongest charge attack in Yuan's kit, as opposed to only her weaker ones. In addition to this though, Yuan is a character who utilizes the manual chain attack option added to Zenless quite well. By using the manual option, players can prevent Yuan from activating chain attacks while an enemy is stunned, and the reason this is so important is because using manual properly can actually increase the total number of hits you land during a stun window. To be clear, this doesn't mean that the stun window itself lasts longer, but rather this means that you have additional opportunities to land attacks within the window that you otherwise wouldn't have had access to. So TLDR, using dashes during your charge attacks and also making use of manual chain attacks can significantly improve your performance on Yuan, but as always, these are definitely not mandatory for playing her. Since her release, new attack agents like Evelynn and Haramasa have also been released, and each agent has been paired with significant releases that actually perform pretty well on Yuan too. For specific values, Evelynn and Haramasa's signatures were calculated to only be roughly 2 to 4% worse than Yuan's, but that amount does change based on the team and setup included. Now, for transparency's sake, this does still mean that Yuan's signature is her best in slot for most cases, but it's important to remember that Brimstone is another great option for Yuan, assuming you have access to it. Another important detail to consider is that Brimstone, when paired with a double support composition like Nicole and Astra, tends to build stacks more reliably and consistently with Yuan's increased field time. This increases its overall value and can make it highly competitive with, if not outright better than her signature W engine in certain scenarios. But S-rank engines aside, the more recently added Mercado Desire does perform very competitively to Yuan's previous best A-rank choice, Starlight engine. So if you're debating between A-rank options, using either or whichever is already leveled will be your best choice, since they're already close in performance. With this though, my final recommendation for W engines is that her signature is not really that worth pulling for. In nearly every test and calculation performed, her signature was only slightly better than other choices, and this of course would come at the cost of a full pity. Now of course, this is definitely not nearly as worth it for the average player, and this is partly because of the passive effect and the overall scaling of Yuan with crit damage and damage percent in general. So if you have other options, I definitely choose those first, but on that note, my recommendations are therefore to use Mercado Desire as her A-rank choice if you've completed the event where it was given for free, and otherwise use Starlight engine as it's currently available in the shop. S-rank wise though, using any of the recent S-rank engines like Evelyn's or Haramasa's will be fine, but seriously, if you do have access to Brimstone, it's actually much better than you'd think, and you should consider it. Now regarding builds, this is where things have changed more noticeably. To start, though Chaotic Metal is nice for teams that involve Nicole, losing out on her as an Ether Anomaly applier does actually decrease the overall uptime of Chaotic Metal's 4-piece effect. As a result, non-Nicole teams find greater value in 4-piece sets like Woodpecker. However, something even more interesting for Yuan is the Shadow Harmony set released as of 1.6. Now you might be thinking that using the set for a character without aftershock attacks would be unusual, but in reality, Yuan players who can utilize the dashes during her charge attacks and assault mode can actually make great use of this set's passive. To be clear, if you aren't using these dashes during combat, this set is much worse than her alternatives, but it is something worth considering, especially with the stats that it provides. Moving along, the final 4-piece set that I also found to work well with Yuan since her 1.1 release is Hormone Punk, but to be clear, this set does also require more timing to make full use of its effect. Overall though, this is definitely another solid option that is competitive to sets like Woodpecker and Shadow Harmony, especially if you aren't using Nicole with Yuan. Now regarding her 2-piece set, the same rule of taking whichever disc drives have the most substat rolls on a piece is ideal, and so between disc drives like Hormone Punk, Chaotic Metal, Branching Blade, or any DPS increasing sets, choosing the option with the most substat rolls should be your goal. Now let's talk about stats. Given the fact that Yuan gains crit rate from other sources depending on your setup, the amount that you'll be looking for will definitely depend on your account. Overall though, the 3 stats that you're looking for in terms of substats for an attack-based character are crit rate, crit damage, and attack. Regarding main stats, this does mean that crit damage and crit rate will be her ideal 4th slot, depending on factors like your Nicole's Mindscapes or your W engine choice. But for her 5th slot, ether damage does perform best, followed by attack percent and pen ratio percent, but to be fair, her best 5th slot will also be influenced by the supports that you end up running. So, like before, this is another case of check your support so that you can decide on which is best. Now fortunately, 6th slot wise, attack percent once again performs best, but this should be no surprise. And now finally, let's talk about our sample stat line alongside my recommendations for those of you trying to update or build your Yuan in 2025. First, stat line wise, your goal is roughly 3000 attack, anywhere between 40 and 70 crit rate depending on your teammates and your W engine, and at least 160 to 175 crit damage as your last stat to look for. With this, the main stats I'd recommend are 4th slot crit damage, 5th slot ether damage, and 6th slot attack percent, but as always, these are just recommendations and the ideal or optimal main stat can definitely change depending on your account. Next, let's talk about Yuan's Mindscapes. During her release banner, there was a lot of discussion about how impactful Yuan's first Mindscape would be, and in early calculations where stun windows were the only thing people cared about, this Mindscape was not nearly as insane as it sounded. However, with the introduction of double support teams and an improved understanding of what ZenlessZoneZero's endgame would look like, this Mindscape is much more valuable. To be clear, this does specifically buff Nicole Astra or Trigger Astra based teams, but early calculations were correct in assuming that this had minimal effects on stun focused Yuan teams. That said, content like Deadly Assault also has longer periods of Yuan being on field to basic attack, so this Mindscape has even greater value for those too. Now our 2nd and 4th Mindscape are decent increases to Yuan's Yuan's overall DPS, but truthfully, and as I mentioned in my first guide on her, the stat increases from these Mindscapes are not nearly as insane as they sound. Now despite this, they do provide noticeable damage increases should you have them, but as you can tell from the buffs themselves, these are not the sort of game-changing functional changes that you'd otherwise get from something like her first Mindscape, so do with this what you will. Finally though, her 6th Mindscape is definitely a major increase to her damage, but given the nature of this feature, it's slightly more difficult to appreciate its value in shorter content. For clarity, consuming 12 total shotgun shells to then reduce the cost of her next EX special attack will only happen a few times in an encounter like Shiyu defense, but when used in content like Deadly Assault or an Endless Tower, the bonuses from the 6th Mindscape are much more significant. Now regarding Yuan's team options, she's definitely received several usable partners and lineups since her Rose incident, but this is even more evident with Trigger being released in 1.6, as Yuan Trigger Astra is one of the strongest Yuan teams thus far. That said, in terms of standout Yuan teams, Yuan Trigger Astra, Yuan Nicole Astra, and Yuan Chingy Nicole were some of the most consistent teams when paired with our favorite Ether DPS, but there is something that I wanted to touch on briefly when it comes to Yuan's teams. Now although everyone at this point knows that Astra Yao plus any agent is extremely powerful, it is also worth noting that Trigger also performed very well with Yuan specifically. From tests both in Shiyu defense and even Deadly Assault, Trigger teams compared to Chingy teams were seeing a massive boost in scoring and clear times. But to be clear, Chingy was still relatively competitive, especially when fighting against enemies that could be eliminated in a single stun window. Moving beyond the limited agents, it's also worth knowing that pairing Yuan with any random stunner simply for the sake of stunning may not always be worth it. For instance, with a character like A-Rank Ambi, the value she brings by being able to stun is much lower than you expect. Even using a double support lineup like Lucy and Nicole or Lucy and Sokaku can see quicker and higher results than Ambi, and that's partly because of the content and the fights that you would bring Yuan to. The unknown corruption complex fight, for instance, is much less reliant on a dedicated stunner for the purposes of dazing the boss, and instead impair the boss's legs while abusing the fight's gimmick slash minigame will yield better results. To keep this section short though, I'll now briefly touch on the feeling and performance of each team I tested with Yuan, so that at least you have an idea of what to expect when I played with that team. Yuan Trigger Astra was easily the most fun I've had with Yuan, as it required very minimal management of resources or timing on my buffs slash debuffs. In addition to this though, this is easily my favorite of all the teams I tested thus far in terms of the healthy balance between play and performance. Yuan Nicole Astra was very competitive to Trigger Astra depending on the fight that I brought her to, but I found the constant management of Nicole's debuffs to be much more taxing and uncomfortable by comparison. Yuan Chingy Nicole was definitely one of the most comfortable, easy to play, however lowest performing teams that I had tested, but this was definitely a team that could be taken to higher levels, assuming that I actually committed to learning the team's optimization. Finally, any team with non-limiteds like Yuan Ambi Nicole or Yuan Lucy Nicole honestly performed close enough to each other that it didn't affect my feeling of the two squads, but I will say that using Lucy on a team with Nicole did take away from using her on another team, which does make this feel slightly worse. Now we have the most important question of all though, is Yuan worth pulling for? And like usual, here are a few things to consider regarding her value. First, she's still one of the only Ether DPS to be released. Second, she's easily one of the lowest skill floor characters to play, meaning that picking up and playing her for the first time is extremely simple. Third, one of her best supports is free and given out during the story in the form of Nicole. And finally, it's important to remember that Yuan's build options are now even more flexible. With the addition of new agents, she has even more versatile and unrestricted build choices, so consider this before you pull for her. That's going to be it for today's video though guys. I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe. Check out the rest of my socials if you want to find out more content like this and more from me. And as always guys, thank you again for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy, good night.